The evening subway car was a suffocating box of fatigue, filled with the city's exhaustion. Leo, the single father, stood gripping his young daughter, Clara, who was asleep on his tired shoulder. A drawn, exhausted woman, Martha, entered the train, barely able to stand. Not a single passenger budged. Leo gently roused Clara and gave up his precious seat to the stranger. A nearby passenger sneered. A pointless gesture. From the front row, Lara Vance, a billionaire CEO, silently watched the decent father. The entire cynical train car was about to witness a quiet, monumental reversal of fate. Leo's life was defined by the relentless, grinding pressure of low-wage survival, a constant battle against the tide of bills and the clock. He was a warehouse worker, a man whose strength was measured in boxes moved, not in career potential. He wore the physical toll of his life like a second skin, the deep lines around his eyes, the slight involuntary tremor of his hands from repetitive lifting, the ever-present ache in his lower back. His existence was a constant triage. Clara's needs were always, without exception, ranked above his own deep exhaustion. He ate last, he slept least, and his personal desires had been effectively archived. He had learned long ago to occupy the margins, to be the one who automatically conceded ground. In any public confrontation or any competition for comfort, he was the first to yield, often mistaken for weakness by those who saw only his worn clothes and his tired eyes. This habit of self-erasure had become Leo's silent survival mechanism. Clara, his 6-year-old daughter, was a perfect reflection of his character. She was an unusually quiet child, uncomplaining and fiercely attached to her father. She instinctively knew the demands of their hard life. Be quiet, be grateful, demand nothing. She never asked for the toys other children had, instead valuing the small, stolen moments of her father's undivided attention. Her weight, usually a comfort, now felt like a heavy anchor on his shoulder, amplifying his fatigue after the 12-hour double shift. This commute was particularly brutal. It followed a shift that had stretched both of them beyond their physical limits, running only on the fumes of simple love and raw parental commitment. The cynical crowd. Martha, the woman who took his seat, was entirely nondescript, a civilian face of profound ordinary exhaustion. She wore a tired, faded dress, suggesting she, too, was coming from a place of hard labor or severe stress. No one had reason to notice her, except for the desperate frailty that prompted Leo's action. The commuter in the expensive, slightly too tight suit, who had scoffed, adjusted his tie. He considered Leo's sacrifice an act of sheer foolishness, a violation of the primary rule of the public transport ecosystem: self-preservation. He needs to learn to look out for number one, the suited man muttered just loud enough for his neighbor to hear, receiving a grunt of agreement. Leo ignored them. He simply held Clara tighter to his side, his large calloused hand enveloping her small one, creating a tiny safe bubble against the cold tide of humanity. The observer. Meanwhile, Lara Vance, the billionaire CEO and founder of Vance Global Strategies, continued her silent surveillance from the front. She wasn't usually on the subway. She was performing one of her periodic, unannounced reality checks, a deliberate effort to escape the gilded cage of her private limo and the filtered reporting of her staff. She was accustomed to seeing people operate solely through the lens of transaction, every action a calculated move toward profit or gain. Her world was built on contracts and quid pro quo. What she witnessed here, a costly sacrifice with zero prospect of repayment, a voluntary forfeiture of comfort, was an anomaly that defied her professional axioms. Ilara's mind drifted back. She recalled her own years as a young, struggling entrepreneur, standing on crowded trains, her briefcases heavy with samples and debt, while fully able-bodied men refused to meet her gaze. She knew the sting of being utterly invisible when help was most desperately needed. This memory added a layer of personal poignancy to her observation. The train rattled, accelerating into a dark tunnel. The sudden, sharp movement jarred Leo, and Clara nearly stumbled into the aisle. His arm immediately tightened, securing her with the practiced, immediate instinct of a lighthouse keeper protecting the light. The jerk elicited a loud, exasperated groan from a passenger behind them, annoyed only by the train's failure to deliver a smooth ride, utterly deaf to the human drama unfolding. Leo's moment of profound human kindness was framed by the cold, indifferent stares of the surrounding crowd. The vulnerability of his decency stood in sharp contrast to the armored apathy of the city. This observation solidified her decision. Ilara Vance was not one to merely observe. She was an agent of systemic change. She saw a necessary correction in the moral economy of the train car, and she decided quite abruptly that she would intervene. The silent moment of public judgment was about to be shattered by an unexpected act of faith, delivered by a woman who rarely did anything without massive, strategic purpose. With the smooth, almost unsettling grace of a high-powered executive, Ilara Vance rose from her seat. Her movement was deliberate, instantly drawing the eye because of her tailored elegance, a sharp silhouette in the sea of rumpled, exhausted cotton and polyester. Her appearance demanded respect, even before her identity was known. She did not approach Leo first. She moved directly to Martha, the woman who had taken the seat, her path slicing through the standing commuters like a hot knife through butter. "Forgive me for intruding," Ilara said softly, her voice low and resonant, yet devoid of any patronizing tone. "But are you certain you are all right? You truly looked quite unwell when you boarded." Her questions were measured, showing deep, authentic concern, not merely curiosity, forcing Martha to look up and meet her gaze. Martha was momentarily flustered, unused to being the recipient of such direct, polished attention, but the genuine nature of the inquiry broke through her fatigue. She began to explain, her voice catching as she recounted a terrible, draining day. Losing her second-shift cleaning job because the facility closed early, rushing to the hospital after a frantic call about her elderly mother, and facing the crushing reality of an overdue rent payment. Martha finished, her face flushed with the embarrassment of sharing such private, painful failure. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just didn't expect anyone to notice." Ilara listened patiently, her expression unwavering, validating Martha's pain simply by refusing to look away. "You needed the seat," she stated simply. "It was a correct assessment." The spotlight shifts. Then Ilara turned. Her gaze settled on Leo, who still held Clara tightly, his weariness more apparent than ever now that he was forced to stand in the center of attention. A visible layer of anxiety coated him. He felt exposed and utterly out of place. "And you, sir?" Ilara addressed him, her voice slightly louder now, ensuring the surrounding passengers could hear. "I understand the basic requirement of human courtesy, but you are also visibly exhausted, and you carry a child. Why did you choose to make your own journey harder, knowing the cost to yourself?" Leo shifted his weight, adjusting Clara on his chest. He cleared his throat, feeling the hot, uncomfortable spotlight of the entire car. He was not used to explaining his quiet, ethical choices. He met Ilara's keen eyes squarely. "Ma'am, it wasn't a calculated choice. It was a reaction. I saw her swaying, and I knew what standing when you're that spent feels like. She needed the seat more than I needed the rest." And he added, looking down at Clara, who was now stirring slightly, "I always stand taller when I know my child is safe, even if I have to carry her." His answer was simple, direct, and completely unadorned by any attempt at heroism or self-praise. It was simply the transparent truth of a good man. The quiet had become intense, spreading beyond the immediate section. Commuters further down the car, sensing the profound, unusual tension, removed their headphones, craned their necks, and began to openly eavesdrop. A seat of honor. Ilara nodded slowly, a small, knowing glint in her eyes, accepting his answer as a verifiable data point. She then gestured toward her own, now empty seat, a prime, comfortable, high-back spot by the window. "Clara," Ilara said, her voice dropping back to a gentle, compelling register. "Your dad is clearly a very strong man, a hero, but you don't have to be quite so strong tonight. Come and sit next to me. You deserve a rest." "Hey, Tunam." Clara, slightly dazed by the noise, looked up at Leo, her eyes asking permission in that silent, intuitive way children communicate with their parents. Leo gave a grateful, relieved nod. Go on, sweetie. It's all right. Thank you, ma'am. That's very generous. Clara carefully slid into the seat, momentarily dwarfed by the luxurious material of Alara's jacket left draped over the seat. Alara settled her attention back on Leo, asking him about his life, his job, his aspirations for Clara, the constant draining logistical challenges of his schedule. He responded with brevity and resilience. He spoke of his love for his daughter, his desire for educational stability for her, and the perpetual difficulty of advancing without the required education or time off for training. He maintained his dignity, offering no self-pity or complaint, only objective facts about his circumstances. The critical turning point came from the periphery, a small, almost undetectable movement that nevertheless changed the trajectory of the moment. A passenger 2 rows back, a mid-level executive scrolling through financial news, gasped almost inaudibly. He hadn't been paying attention to the conversation, but he recognized the distinctive bespoke tailoring of Ilara's jacket and the intense proprietary manner of her speaking. He frantically cross-referenced her face with an image he'd seen that morning in a business journal. He knew. He had just identified one of the most powerful, intensely private financial figures in the region, a woman whose net worth exceeded the gross domestic product of several small nations. The realization that the woman orchestrating this bizarre public theater was the formidable Alara Vance flashed through the car like a sudden electrical surge, traveling person to person through widening eyes and subtle gestures. Whispers erupted, quickly suppressed into excited, disbelieving murmurs. The Vance. She's the Vance. The suited man who had scoffed in Act 1 suddenly looked pale, terrified, understanding the catastrophic gravity of his earlier, dismissive comment. The eyes of judgment and mockery immediately pivoted to wide-eyed, ravenous curiosity and awe. The atmosphere had decisively changed. The cynical passengers were now the humbled, silent witnesses, all waiting for the billionaire's final, grand move. The low, frantic whispers circulated like an uncontrolled electrical current. Vance, Ilara Vance, the CEO. On the subway? The name synonymous with extreme wealth, ruthless intelligence, and formidable power echoed through the suddenly attentive minds of the commuters. They had discounted Leo. Now they were terrified of being discounted by her. The entire carriage from front to back gradually arrived at the terrifying and thrilling realization of who was standing in their midst. The air grew impossibly thick. The previous conversational hum was replaced by a spreading, absolute nerve-wracking silence. Ilara, acutely aware of her captive, stunned audience, turned back to the entire car. This was her moment of ethical reckoning, a public lesson she intended to give free of charge. Twist 1. A public declaration of value. Ilara spoke, her voice carrying the undeniable calm command of a courtroom or a boardroom. I believe you all now understand who I am. Her eyes swept across the frozen faces of the passengers, lingering briefly on the man in the suit. But I want you all to understand, with absolute clarity, who he is. She directed everyone's attention back to Leo, who looked more bewildered than ever, his hand resting instinctively on Clara's head, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. Leo, she addressed him, her voice softening only for him. Thank you. Your action today gave me something that no amount of money can purchase. Renewed faith in the human heart. She elaborated, making sure her message penetrated the shell of every listener, creating a permanent memory. I have seen 1,000 acts of calculated virtue in my life. A donation for a tax write-off, a courtesy offered for future gain. This, she stated, pointing to the empty space where his seat had been, was not one of them. This was an act of personal cost, given out of genuine concern for a total stranger. That is pure, unadulterated integrity. And I stand here to declare that such character is fundamentally more valuable, more difficult to acquire, and more reliable than any financial asset or advanced degree I have ever dealt with in high finance. Leo stammered, his eyes wide, shaking his head slightly. He had just wanted to rest. He had just wanted to do the right thing. He had no context, no framework for this sudden, massive public attention. Twist 2. The opportunity for change. Illyra moved seamlessly from philosophy to a concrete, strategic proposition. The silence of the car was now a canvas for her words. Leo, I recognize a leader of unwavering integrity when I see one. You have demonstrated the moral commitment I value above all skill sets. Skills can be taught, character cannot. Are you willing to let me invest in your future? Are you prepared to take an opportunity that will give Clara the foundational stability she deserves, and that you, through your sacrifices, have earned 10 times over? Leo remained cautious, his single dad instincts immediately wary of the grandiose scale of the moment. He stepped slightly back, protecting Clara. Ma'am, with all due respect, I didn't do this for a reward. I don't want to be seen as someone who asks for charity. I can work. Illyra's expression softened, acknowledging his deep sense of pride, a pride she admired. It is not charity, Leo. It is restitution. It is me paying back a favor to the universe for all the times I stood, exhausted and ignored, as a young woman with nothing but ambition. She leaned in, her voice dropping slightly, conspiratorially toward the rest of the silent car. I will be frank. The high world I operate in is frequently a disappointment. I had come to believe that genuine, selfless goodness simply did not exist outside of a few naive places or old novels. Your quiet kindness changed my mind. I need to know that there are still good people in the world. I am now looking to hire and mentor people based on character first and competence second, because character is the only truly unteachable commodity, and you have it in abundance. Justice and humility. The passengers who had scorned or laughed at Leo's action now stared resolutely at the dirty floor of the subway car, their faces etched with acute, searing humility. The man in the suit was sweating visibly. The cynical passenger who had scoffed earlier tried to cough loudly, perhaps hoping to clear the air of his mistake, but the sound only emphasized the deep silence. Martha, still in the given seat, pressed her face into her hands, tears flowing not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming, sweet power of witnessing immediate, poetic justice. Clara, sitting next to the billionaire, looked up at her tired father with shining, unadulterated pride. Her small hero being honored on a massive scale. She reached out and touched his hand, silently grounding him. Illyra reached into her blazer pocket. She extracted her sleek, matte black business card, the symbol of her empire, a powerful small piece of plastic that felt like a key to a new world. She placed it firmly into Leo's rough, calloused hand. Do not worry about the scale of the promise, she instructed, her final command. Simply call my office. We will talk about building your life one step at a time. This is not the end of the story, Leo. This is the beginning of the blueprint. The train slowed, grinding to a halt at the final station. The carriage doors hissed open, releasing the pressure. The passengers, finally free to move, filed out in a state of absolute, profound silence. Not a single person dared to meet Leo's eye. They had witnessed not a random act, but a public, irreversible reversal of fate, all thanks to one small, relinquished chair. They left the car carrying the uncomfortable weight of a moral lesson they would never forget. The matte black business card remained on Leo's kitchen counter for a full day, an object of fear and fascination. It seemed too important, too sharp, too potentially life-changing to touch. He finally called on the third day, his anxiety warring with the fierce hope he held for Clara. He was immediately connected to Illyra's personal assistant and scheduled for a private meeting the following morning. He arrived at the imposing glass and steel tower, the headquarters of Vance Global Strategies, still half expecting a mix-up, convinced the entire event had been an elaborate, chaotic dream fueled by fatigue. The security was discreet but absolute. Leo was ushered into Illyra's world, a world of hushed carpets and panoramic city views. The meeting with Illyra Vance, however, was surprisingly simple, held in a modestly sized sunlit office, devoid of any unnecessary extravagance. Illyra was dressed casually, for her, in a cashmere sweater. Illyra spent the first half hour not reviewing his warehouse duties or technical qualifications, but delving into his principles. She asked deep, searching questions about his dedication to Clara, how he handled pressure when the bills piled up, and his functional definition of success. She was testing his resilience in his moral framework. "I have read every character reference and background check on you, Leo," Alara confessed, leaning forward. "The information confirms what I observed on the train. You are dependable to a fault. You manage a demanding environment with limited resources and absolute commitment." She spoke only of the value of his moral commitment, not of financial assets. "Your character is your greatest capital. I want to deploy that capital strategically." She paused, allowing the gravity of her statement to settle. "The kind of integrity you showed, sacrificing your small comfort when your reserves were empty, is the only thing that cannot be faked in a crisis. That is the cornerstone of trust, and we build global strategies on trust." The strategic offer. She offered him a position as a logistics and resource manager, a role focused on coordinating teams, supply chains, and complex project schedules under strict deadlines. It was a job requiring extreme organizational skill, a sharp eye for waste, and moral responsibility. The offer included intensive internal training that started immediately. "This isn't about moving boxes, Leo. This is about managing people and promises. The skills you use to run a household as a single father, budgeting, energy, anticipating needs, managing crisis, are the same skills required to run logistics. You've been training for this job your entire adult life." The salary offered was triple his current wage, instantly dissolving the financial strain that had been a permanent knot in his stomach. She added a crucial detail. "You will spend your first 6 months shadowing managers who exemplify our core values. Your task isn't to innovate immediately, but to observe where we fail in basic human decency and recommend structural corrections. You will be our internal moral compass." Leo immediately hesitated, not out of fear of the job, but out of fear for his daughter. "Ma'am, the hours. I can't afford to compromise my time with Clara. She is my priority. She needs me after school." Alara smiled gently. "Precisely why you were hired. Your family is our priority too. Your schedule will be completely flexible, built around Clara's school day. You will have a dedicated work-from-home allowance, full health coverage, and time for every school play and every doctor's visit. We are not just hiring you, we are investing in your foundation." The revival detail. The sheer, simple stability was overwhelming. That very next Monday morning, Leo walked Clara to her public school, holding her hand, without the crushing weight of the double shift already looming over him. For the first time in years, the simple act of breathing felt effortless. He realized how much physical and psychological space had been taken up by the constant worry about rent and food. He walked into the Vance Global offices with a lightness he hadn't felt in years, a feeling of being genuinely respected and recognized for his true worth, not merely tolerated as cheap labor. Clara started smiling more easily, the small, constant tension around her eyes dissolving with the stability. She received new art supplies, not as a luxury, but as a standard purchase. Leo's new colleagues treated him as a manager, valued for his perspective and his grounded ethics. No one ever mentioned the seat he gave up. The act itself was now invisible, having served its purpose. That moment of quiet altruism was not an act of grace to be recalled. It was the verified, essential starting point. Trust had been planted, and it had rooted itself deeply in his life, proving that decency always finds its eventual reward. His simple act of kindness, freely given, had returned to him as the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to stand taller as he always wanted. Leo did not experience instant, headline-making wealth. He achieved something much more sustainable, a powerful opportunity to learn, a clear trajectory of guaranteed growth, and the immediate ability to provide Clara with a stable, debt-free future. He climbed slowly but surely within Vance Global, valued consistently for his reliability and ethical rigor, eventually becoming a mentor to younger, high-potential staff. A year later, Leo was leading a small team focused on creating efficient, human-centric solutions, a rarity in large-scale logistics. He used his unique perspective to improve working conditions for the warehouse workers he once was. He focused heavily on optimizing shift rotations to ensure no employee was ever forced into the kind of punishing double shifts he had endured. Clara grew into a confident young woman, excelling in school, understanding that the greatest measure of success is the willingness to help others when you have the least to give. Her father's story was her favorite bedtime tale. Elara Vance, the billionaire, found a profound, unexpected satisfaction in her investment. Leo's daily progress was a constant, living vindication that her faith in the quiet decency of ordinary people was well placed. She even quietly implemented a new mandate across the company. Applicants from non-traditional backgrounds with demonstrated ethical consistency were to be prioritized. One evening, Elara invited Leo to a private dinner, not as a superior, but as a business partner. "I didn't just hire a manager," she told him over dinner. "I hired a reality filter. You remind us every day that the numbers represent human lives, not just data points. That is the legacy of the seat you gave up." Martha, the woman in the seat, continued to reach out occasionally to Leo via email. She had found a new stable job and was slowly getting her mother healthy. She never asked for anything, only wishing to express her ongoing gratitude, a living witness to the ripple effect of kindness. No one who was on that train carriage that evening ever truly forgot the silent drama. It became an invisible marker in their consciousness, a reminder that you never truly know who is watching or the immense, life-altering weight of a single moral choice. Some of them even started offering their seats. The final wisdom, the overarching message of this story is etched in simplicity and permanence. One selfless moment, one act of quiet decency possesses the absolute power to alter the course of an entire destiny, setting a cascade of good into motion. True, lasting richness does not begin in bank accounts or investments. It begins in the expansive, unguarded chambers of the human heart, where integrity is the most precious commodity. On a crisp Tuesday morning, the sunlight streamed brilliantly through the windshield of the car Leo now drove. It wasn't luxurious, but it was his. He and Clara walked toward the school entrance with a light, purposeful step, no longer burdened by the invisible weights of chronic instability. They were free. A beautiful future, built on honesty and respect, had been created, not from a lottery ticket or an inheritance, but from a single, simple seat that a single dad willingly chose to give away. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to NL Touching Stories. We tell the stories of sacrifice, redemption, and heroes who choose family without abandoning honor.